Dr. Hart, thank you for being here. Much of the public conversation about 7-OH has focused on the fact that it binds to the mu-opioid receptor. Can you provide us a little more detail about how receptor binding works in the context of kratom and 7-OH? And as a pharmacologist, how should policymakers think about receptor binding versus actual public health outcomes?
Yeah, so if we think about the most successful drug treatment, all right, so people take 7-hydroxy for a number of reasons. Some people take it to wean themselves off of some other opioid. And so one of the ways you do that is you have a replacement mu agonist. Methadone is one of these examples that we use in the United States. Heroin is another example that we use in Europe, in a number of countries in Europe. They give people heroin. And so the point is that you give people something that is going to be reinforcing to them. And for people who use opioid mu agonists are reinforcing. That is, it will keep them coming back to treatment. That's the real important thing that people tend to forget, because remember, the most successful drug treatments in the United States are agonist treatments. And mu agonists are the way we treat opioid addiction. Now, 7-hydroxy has some ideal pharmacological profiles that we don't often talk about. Its half-life, for example, isn't that long. When you think about something like methadone, its half-life is 24 hours, 36 hours. Buprenorphine half-life is also an extended half-life. I bring that up because one of the effects of mu agonist receptor agonists is that they slow down gastrointestinal motility, meaning that you get constipated and you get all these awful GI sort of effects. Something like 7-hydroxy, you don't get these effects as long because the half-life isn't that long. Same is true with heroin. You want a drug that doesn't have those long half-life, because people who have been on methadone for years will ultimately have a lot of GI problems that we don't talk about in our society. And so 7-hydroxy is an ideal agonist for that purpose. Relatively short acting, the half-life isn't that long, and it also produces some positive effects. It's some sort of positive subjective effects, and so it'll keep people coming back, and that's what you want. So the main thing that you want to do is make sure that your unit dose, that is, the dose that you have in each unit, is not too large. And then if that's the case, then people they're less likely to get in trouble. Now, this notion that we're going to prevent all risk is the most ridiculous thing on the planet Earth, because there will be 40,000 Americans dying on our highways each year. People will injure themselves skiing, but we don't outlaw automobiles or skiing. What we do is we try to enhance the safety of these activities, and so just those few pharmacological tidbits will help people understand how to enhance the safety of 7-hydroxy.
Leonard, speaking of risk, I think it was about a year ago, almost to the day, that HHS and FDA, held a joint press conference calling 7-OH the next wave of the opioid epidemic. We know that at least 1 million Americans have consumed roughly 2 billion 7-OH products. But the real-world safety signal looks a lot different from the rhetoric. How much weight first of all, why is that? And second, how much weight should policymakers give to observational evidence when they're deciding whether emergency scheduling is justified?
Well, looking at the record of overdose deaths from 7-OH versus kratom leaf, kratom leaf is more widely used, therefore there are a larger number of deaths, I think a few hundred incidents. 7-OH is far rarer, even though it's a more potent compound. I personally feel HHS is overreacting to this. It could be political, even personal issue. We know there's New York Times articles of significant explanation in the New York Times of the participation of the Secretary of HHS with a kratom vendor in the United States admitted at the hearings on that. So shortly after the article came out in the New York Times, within weeks, suddenly HHS put out their temporary scheduling proposal. This proposal is hastily written, from my view. A number of moments of lack of clarity. It mentions that kratom is specifically limited, free or legal under a certain percentage, but 7 is illegal over a certain percentage. The milligrams per article are mentioned, 1 milligram per article. The activists are trying to raise that to 5 to 7 milligrams. But the order does not mention what an article actually is. Is it a bottle? Is it a gel? Is it a tablet? Typically, article is a tablet, but since they don't specify it in the order, manufacturers and distributors don't know what to do. There's no grace period for manufacturers that may be holding hundreds of kilograms or thousands of kilograms of either the leaf or 7-hydroxy, so there's no real guidelines from this order. In the temporary scheduling arena, we've never seen a temporary scheduling order of this nature, where a massive industry is suddenly declared to be illegal within 30 days. It's unheralded in drug policy. We expect legal actions in the federal courts, temporary scheduling order requests, emergency scheduling order requests, but we have not seen any presently. We trust that the industry and manufacturers will mobilize to begin filings in federal court to delay the action, to ask for greater clarity on the nature of the order. What does an article mean? On what basis is the 1 milligram determined as relatively safe and therefore legal, whereas 1.0001 milligram would be illegal? So it's a field day for analytical laboratories. It's such a murky area that we don't know. DEA can enforce it if they wish. It's a complete chaos in terms of policy and politicians.
So given the vagaries of the order, and maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but it seems safe to say that perhaps the DEA doesn't quite understand this compound or this issue. Mr. Rush, when regulators encounter one of these new consumer products that they don't fully understand, why is prohibition so often the default instead of targeted regulation? How do we keep making the same mistake?
Well, I think with the DEA, when it comes down to it, simply when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And that's kind of the approach. There's not nuance in this. They've taken a stance that any use of a substance that's not an FDA-approved drug is inherently abuse. There's no context to it. And also, too, when you're dealing with the DEA, there comes down to be a cultural issue with their perspective and also, quite frankly, self-interest. What benefit is there in the DEA to not assume this prohibitionist stance? The more drugs that are prohibited, the more drugs they claim they have to regulate and have jurisdiction over, and it's more of a justification for their billions and billions of dollars that taxpayers have to put into a system that produces less than optimal results.
Kat, you're the executive director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I would love to get sort of a personal or organizational perspective on this issue. You guys have been involved in this fight for about a year, or more or less. So how did you get involved in the debate surrounding kratom 7-OH, and how do you think that we got to this point of imminent prohibition?
Yeah, so SSDP, we're the largest grassroots network working to end the war on drugs and replace it with policies rooted in science, compassion, human rights. And so we'd started to hear trickles of a push to recriminalize kratom, right? And or rather to criminalize kratom. We'd seen this in the past in 2012 and 2016, where the grassroots was really able to push back pretty effectively. And so we'd started to hear this and we started to look into, okay, what are the actual threats and map out our strategy around it. And as we were doing that, we started to see this very interesting and unfortunate split where we saw folks targeting 7-OH, which as we looked farther into it, it's a metabolite of kratom. It's one of the 2 main active ingredients in kratom. So when you're talking about, this isn't an attack on kratom, it's an attack on 7-OH, that's like saying, we're not making coffee illegal, just caffeine, right? And so we started to see this. We're like, okay, so what is going on? What is it about this that's making this happen? And it's something that we see happen in a lot of different substances. We've seen it happen with cannabis, for example, where there's sort of like the medical cannabis community is attacking the adult use community, both of whom have an issue with the legal hemp, all of which has resulted in cannabis is still not federally legal. People still get arrested for it. And hemp is about to be re-added to Schedule 1. And so we see a very similar thing at play with kratom and 7-OH, where there is this false narrative going around that 7-OH is this dangerous chemical that is being added to kratom. And kratom, of course, has been used safely for thousands of years. And 7-OH is not really all that different. It's pulling the caffeine out of the coffee and selling a caffeine pill, right? So should you ingest a whole bottle of caffeine pills? No. But a lot of people really are using this. And so as we started to explore the area and started to look into how it was being used, who was using it, we saw some really interesting stories of people who faced with the opioid epidemic, who were either pain patients. The majority of 7-OH regular consumers seem to be older, middle-aged men with back injuries. That seems to be the number one thing that we see. And then the second group of people is people who have opioid use disorder and have decided to taper, either chose not to use prescription opioids or are tapering off oftentimes opioids from the illicit market, where then they shift into 7-OH. They find that they like using this better because they're not getting, at least from the way that they're talking about it, they don't feel as if it's as disruptive. They feel as if they can concentrate. They feel as if they can function with this because of the way that it works. And so they're actually able to be more productive with it. And we're talking about 7-OH, but there's actually several other substances that are also on the chopping block here that are going to become felonies really soon. And one of them is a chemical called SR17018. And this has been really interesting to me because we've started to note this pathway where people are moving from illicit opioids. They're then using 7-OH to reduce that dependence, move past it. And then from 7-OH, they're moving into SR17018. And what's really interesting about that is that, at least from the anecdotal stories, these folks no longer have the same level of cravings, and those cravings are depleting over time. And this has been one of the big issues with opioids, is that it causes a physical dependence that can be lifelong, right? And so this is actually a pathway away from that. And unsurprisingly, because we know that the drug war is a war on people, it's a war on pain patients, it's a war on people who are suffering. We don't care about the science. The DEA does not care about the science behind this. They're going after it, and they're going to be knocking out all of these true medical options for people. And so I just wanted to take a minute to plug that there is actually a comment period. It's supposed to be a 30-day long comment period. It started, it ends on July 31st, and it started on July 6th, end of the day. So maybe a little bit less than 30 days. But folks are publishing letters to the Federal Register talking about their actual usage and how this has helped them and the dosage that they need. And so far, I think there's about 17,000 comments that have been published to the Federal Register. A lot of those have come through this tool that we have here. We'd love for folks to use it, to send a letter, to use their voice to push back against prohibition. But I want to reiterate the power of the grassroots, the power of the people to make change, because, kratom could have been criminalized in 2012. It could have been criminalized in 2016. And in 2012, they didn't have a public comment period, but they did in 2016. And at that point, there were 23,000 comments in the public register, and that's what made the federal government decide to take a step back. And even though they haven't even given us 30 days, in just less than 2 weeks, we've now got about 17,000 comments there. And I think that if people recognize the power that they have and they use that voice to push for treatments, for choice, for autonomy, and against criminalization, against this sort of anti-science, top-down command and control type approach to substances like 7-OH, we can make a difference.
Kat, you mentioned the intra-industry
Yes.
conflict.
Yes.
And I want to get another perspective from the Reason Foundation, but I'm going to break up the order real quick and go to Soren Shade really quick. Soren, you're a Kratom Company owner, and it seems like a lot of Kratom leaf purveyors seem to want 7-OH gone. You don't. Why is that?
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that in a bit, but just to keep things a little bit more conversational.
Sure, yeah.
Carl is wanting to interject, and I just want to make
Yeah.
sure you get
sorry.
a chance to.
No,
to do that.
I just want to say something about what Kat said. Like heroin users crave for light or something like that. That's nonsense. That kind of thing is besmirching 7-hydroxy and other mu agonists, and that's just not true. That's just some hype. People grow out of their addictions, people grow up, and just like any other drug, mu agonists are just like any other drug. So be careful in our sort of besmirching of heroin or those other drugs, because that's why people are attacking 7-hydroxy, because of this mu activity. And so you all, please do not accept the nonsense that people are saying about the opioid crises. And when you talk about opioid crises, you have to ask people, wait, what are you talking about? Overdoses? Addiction? Certainly not addiction. Addiction rates haven't dramatically increased. And then when you start looking at overdoses, you start to realize that across all of these jurisdictions in the United States, they have different definitions for overdoses. That is, in some jurisdictions, you don't even need to have the drug in your system to call it an overdose, whereas other jurisdictions, the drug itself didn't necessarily have to cause the death. And so that's why I want us not to feed into that language, because that language is why we're here with 7-hydroxy today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you calling me in on that. That was not my intention to suggest any sort of stigma around these particular substances. And in fact, I think that that's playing into the policy around this as well. There's a war on opioids, right? And opioids are actually very vital medications. They're very good for things like back surgery, C-sections, things like that. You need opioids. They do help people.
They help people deal with this
They help
fucking
people
administration.
deal with pain. They help people deal with a lot of things that allows them to be more productive people. And I think what is important is that there is access to choice and people are able to find the treatments that let them be more successful, happy, productive people. And for some people, that is 7-OH.
So since it's sort of opening up a little bit, and certainly we'll get to reason, let me make two quick points here. These drugs actually are remarkably safe. There is respiratory depression from very large quantities, but the deaths that have been reported for the leaf, hundreds for example, are generally polydrug scenes where the leaf is noted in the system, but maybe they have 10 other things on board, so it can't really be attributed to the leaf per se. There's no death from 7-hydroxy per se, a single 7-hydroxy dose killing anyone, for example.
And one of the lovely things about opioids is when you put too much in the system too quickly, you will vomit, and it will be violent, and so it's protective. Trust me, I've done these things just to experiment.
The other issue that would be of interest is Jeffrey Singer, who is a drug policy analyst at the Cato Institute,
Yes.
reported some months ago and more recently online that in the event 7 is taken away, because there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of users of Kratom leaf, and 7 was taken away, a modest, occasionally addictive in the wrong hands substance, then we'll see an increase in fentanyl deaths. So whatever HSS's intentions, we have a very sad experiment being conducted, in which we may see a spike in fentanyl deaths as kratom users seek more powerful opioids that are unregulated, underground, manufactured by clandestine laboratories offshore, and thousands of point sources in the United States from a simple synthesis. So we have a real spectacle ahead.
Yeah, I would add some to that, what Leonard said in terms of the overdose deaths. The DEA itself said it could only find, since 2019, I think 152 overdose cases related to 7-OH specifically. No, I'm sorry, the DEA said they found 85 specifically related to 7-OH, 55 of which were fatal, and most of which had polysubstance use involved. They didn't actually give specifics, probably because an earlier study, which looked at over 27,000 overdoses in the United States between 2016 and 2017, could only find 150 some odd overdose cases related to kratom specifically, and only 7 of those cases, in only 7 of those cases, kratom was the only substance found. That doesn't mean it was the only substance they were on, and it doesn't mean it's what caused their death, but if we're talking about a million users, 2 billion servings, 7 potential overdose deaths tells you in the scale of things compared to the prevalence. These are marginal cases, likely related to other things. I also want to comment on the idea of people being pushed away from a substance that has, if you look at the 30,000 comments, 20,000 comments from 2016, if you look at the 16,000 comments that are being submitted now, you have people that for whatever reason, either they couldn't get a hold of opioids to treat their pain adequately because of the way that we now treat anybody who uses opioids is functionally a criminal, or they were using illicit opioids or prescription opioids and wanted to taper down, and they have finally found something that helps them to participate in their lives more. And we know that addiction and drug abuse, a lot of it is psychological. It's not necessarily about the substance that people are using. It's about what else is happening in their life. And now you have these potentially millions of people who found something that has fewer side effects, is helping them, is reducing their pain. For that to be taken away from them, a very significant portion of them are going to commit suicide, are going to go back or into the illicit market for opioids, or as Leonard mentioned, into the market for unregulated kratom products, which all of these are much worse outcomes than what we currently have based on the data that we have.
You mentioned the DEA's findings of fact. They reference overdose deaths going back to 2019. Of course, these products didn't come on the market until 2023. Presumably, they're conflating both 7-OH and kratom-related deaths.
Yeah, because as Kat said, 7-OH is a metabolite of
Right.
mitragynine, which is the main alkaloid in kratom.
Right.
And when you consume kratom, part of the mitragynine is converted by liver enzymes into 7-OH.
So everybody that dies with kratom in their system
has
will have
7-OH in their system. Yeah.
Right. It's literally just your body turning it into that. So.
And this is getting to a deeper core of the issue with drug prohibition and drug regulation in this country at large, is the statistics that are used to back up and enforce all of their scheduling actions. We have the opioid overdose crisis, and these numbers are being collected by people with high school educations and elected positions, as Carl said, using completely different criteria in one jurisdiction from another to create a vast swell of a number that scares the hell out of everyone and is used to justify an increased budget for the DEA and police forces. This one of the things that I love about kratom so much, back to your sort of directed question, why am I a kratom leaf vendor, speaking up for not kratom leaf, but for all drugs, because kratom has been just the perfect metaphor for this country and the way it's worked. I've learned so much about lobbying here. I've learned so much about how we don't live in a democratic society. We live in a country that is entirely bought and sold. I learned that from working with the American Kratom Association, the Global Kratom Association, and now the 7-hydroxy industry. It's just the way this country works, and you're naive if you see it otherwise. And specifically for the toxicology that's being used to support the overdose claims, largely in the 100,000 plus people, you look at kratom as a particular example of this. You see that so many of the deaths that are attributed to kratom are not only polysubstance, but they're also the evidence for it being kratom at all is very murky. It's often there is a bag in a room associated with the overdose. And then at last year's kratom symposium in Florida, the head of NMS Labs, which is the largest toxicology lab in the country, was talking about, we should probably figure out how to test for 7-hydroxymetragenine in the bloodstream because we don't have that yet, and all we have is metragenine, and our 7-hydroxy tests that we are using are very unstable, so we need to figure out what it degrades into in order to be a proxy for this. This was in 2024. They said the largest testing lab in the country said they didn't know how to test for 7-hydroxy. They hadn't been testing for 7-hydroxy. So anyone that's claiming deaths related to 7-hydroxy before that are pulling numbers out of their ass or based on something that's not blood serum levels. It's just a complete and utter fabrication of data to support this. And every one of these things they use to support it crumbles under the slightest bit of scrutiny.
I want to leave us with something, just to show you all how little respect your government has for you. So whenever you see the line graph, that line graph of drug-related fatalities over time, that's a line graph. So two assumptions of a line graph is that all the data are collected the same way in each jurisdiction, and you're using the same definition.
Yep.
You violate those two consumptions, you can't use a line graph. But we still use those line graphs, even though those assumptions are violated all the time. That's one point. Second point, your government does not even make an attempt to tell you that a drug-related death was consistent with the pharmacological effects of that drug that they're claiming that the person died from.
Mm-hmm.
That's how little respect your government has for you. For example, if someone dies from an opioid overdose, you would expect something like respiratory depression, not a seizure. Or someone dies from what they call in cocaine-related death, which is difficult. You would expect something like cardiovascular illnesses or something like that. These things are not even consistent with the drug that they're claiming causing the death. This is how you can tell your government is lying to you.
So, given the total dearth of evidence and like that you just mentioned, and the difficulties, Soren, that you just mentioned, and testing for this stuff, what are the implications for kratom products in the future? I mean, if they schedule one of the kratom's own component alkaloids, how are they going to enforce that, and what does that do to the rest of the industry?
Well, one of the things we're doing is we're educating the population, right? So, like when they're talking about the dangers of 7-hydroxy, show me the evidence, right? And based on these things that we're talking about, and then you can push back on that sort of thing. I mean, and then you give people ways to push back on that charge.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, I was just going to agree with Carl that education is very, very important there with regard to continuing to push back. But with regard to how it will affect the industry in the future, it's very, very predictable. It's what happens with Prohibition every single time. For one, we're leaving the precursor, which is remarkably easy to convert into 7-hydroxymetragenine, available and unregulated to buy in bulk, in mass, without any sort of controls for anyone, and that's good. I'm not suggesting we should regulate metragenine, but it's not hard to do this at home. 7-hydroxymetragenine will proliferate, and I'll tell you what, is they're not going to have the insane quality control that I have witnessed with my own two eyes when it comes to manufacturing this. They're not going to care about solvent removal in an oven just to get rid of trace components that don't matter in acute levels, but over chronic exposure time start to stack up and have bad physiological effects. They're not going to care about that if they're whipping it up in their room to share with their friends. And that's good. I mean, people should be encouraged to do that now, but in terms of concern for public health and availability of this, the homemade 7-hydroxy is not the safest 7-hydroxy that you can get. Second, there's going to be a proliferation of novel analogs of which toxicity and dose and side effects and literally everything is an unknown with these novel analogs, other than rough, predictable binding based on the parent scaffold that they're subtly modifying. But I mentioned this earlier on the 7 Hope call, is there's one thing that's very predictable when it comes to this stuff, is how the media will react, which is the media is not going to understand nuances. They're going to, first off, say, drug-related death, great, we'll get a bunch of clicks for that. Let's go a little bit more in depth. Oh, it's 13-bromo 7-hydroxy speciosolatin. Oh, that's an interesting one. We'll just say it's kratom. Kratom killed this person. Kratom is proliferating. New synthetic kratom is proliferating and kill people. And how is that going to affect me as a kratom tea business? It's not going to benefit my sales. It's not going to benefit my ability to push for regulations in small markets. It's going to make me constantly be spending money and time trying to argue against these half-truths that are being spouted in the media as accurate representations of what's going on. And that's not where I want to spend my time. And that's what frustrates me so much about lobbying. I've heard numbers floating around, but millions and millions of dollars have been spent enriching lawyers and ex-politicians when that money could go to reducing the cost of the product for consumers themselves, or being spent on science to understand these products better, or just literally hookers and cocaine would be a better use of this money than what's going on right now. So it's just a horrible, disgusting feedback cycle here, and it's not going to benefit kratom.
I think a lot of kratom companies have been lied to by certain entities that benefit from them paying them to go and lobby against this. And they think that this is what's going to save them. They think that this is what is going to prevent kratom from getting criminalized. And as you pointed out, kratom is just the precursor. Anybody can do this. They're going to get attacked for the exact same thing. But the bottom line is that prohibition kills. Prohibition kills because people will kill themselves, because they will be in too much pain and they won't know how to deal with it. It kills because it makes drugs less safe. It makes it harder to get the right dosage. It makes it harder to make sure that there's not other contaminants or that you're even getting the thing that you want. And it kills because these laws ultimately are enforced at the point of a gun.
Yeah.
I have to agree with Soren and Kat that the prohibition, the parallel to it is the prohibition of alcohol. A massive U.S. industry from one day to the next is illegal. Everything goes underground. We have impure products being made, moonshine, methanol-tainted products, deaths from all of that. So we're creating a massive gray market, a very simple synthesis, simpler than methamphetamine. Could be done in a Coke bottle. The deleterious outcomes from the order are larger than the deleterious outcomes from allowing it to proceed. This goes back to Jeffrey Singer's paper with the Cato, saying that we need a psychoactive in society other than nicotine and alcohol. A modest psychoactive that is safe, relatively non-toxic. Kratom answers a lot of those questions, and perhaps the better path would be to leave kratom and kratom products, 7-hydroxy, alone. We may have less deaths and a better social outcome from a non-intervention on this issue.
The other thing that a non-intervention policy here will do is will allow so there are a lot of unknowns still with kratom and 7-OH, sure, right? Obviously the one thing we absolutely know is what will happen if we prohibit it. And one of the things that will happen is that research will grind to a halt. Even if researchers can still get a hold of these products, especially when it's a new substance, the best research and the bulk of the research that you get when it comes to how much should people be taking, which conditions is it good for, which conditions or people should not be taking this, under what circumstances, that comes from people. That comes from surveys that, like most new drugs, I think 50% of new drug discoveries actually come from clinicians who are talking to their patients who are saying, hey, I'm using this substance off-label, I'm using this prescription medication off-label. When you schedule something in Schedule 1, it becomes a self-fulfilling and self-funded prophecy, in that you're saying we're going to put this in Schedule 1 just because we don't know. We just don't know. And then you never know. You can no longer ask the questions that will allow you to know how these substances can be used safely. And maybe 50 years from now, when enough people argue about it long enough, it becomes legal, and at that point, the people who want to do it right and be part of the legal industry have to compete with an existing enormous illicit market that is well set up, that has their customer base already, and then you run into what we've had with cannabinoids, in states like California where they have legalized it, but it's very difficult because you have a legal regulated product that's a little bit more expensive and people continue to use their neighborhood dealer.
I think
Please, the actual, there's another parallel other than alcohol to this, and this is DEA's attempt to control methamphetamine in the past, and we'll see this happen with kratom. In the past, the major meth sources were derived from a substance called P2P, phenyl-2-propanone. There were only a few manufacturers of P2P in the United States. All underground meth people had to go there. When they made that illegal, manufacturers discovered that we can get it from ephedrine, available in every pharmacy. The suppression of methamphetamine, of P2P, led to an explosion in methamphetamine use because thousands of point sources occurred. With the suppression of kratom 7-hydroxy, thousands of point sources would also occur, and of course, leading to greater impurities. So these are issues of great concern. DEA, HHS may be creating more problems than it is solving. The other issue is that manufacturers, I've attended trade shows in which there are hundreds of 7-hydroxy vendors present, all well and good, but as those are shut down, the manufacturers will look for other materials, other botanical extracts, including kratom, to produce. So we'll see not only the absence of 7-H, but the arrival of 20, 30, 100 new materials. Not all of these will be relatively safe botanicals. They'll be complete chemical inventions that have not been tested on the bench or in animals, suddenly proliferating. So we may be creating a greater disaster.
I think part of the insanity here is just how we're addressing this. Attacking individual drugs as being good or bad, and this one's worse, this one's worse. We attack this substance rather than looking at the underlying cause of the use of the substance. Why do people need to use this? Why are they using this? And this is just addressing the symptom rather than the disease. We just, the causes, I mean, people are not doing this irrationally because they want to be addicted or they want to destroy themselves. They're doing it because they get a benefit from this that resolves a problem that they have. And we don't want to address the harder issues of lack of community, lack of connection, lack of opportunity, economic instability, housing instability. We'd rather than tackle those issues, we'd just rather put it off on a drug that's easy to scapegoat as being the cause. And we don't want to address really the tough issues that we have to address and the investments that we need to make to be able to resolve those issues.
Just to be clear, people use drugs to connect and have a good time, and not because of their pathological, and that's okay. Just like they engage in sex to connect, drugs are the same way. So I want to make sure that we're not thinking that just because people are using 7-hydroxy, they're doing so because of some pathological reason.
I have to clarify my position as a deadhead and a raver.
Yeah.
That I have seen many positive pro-social benefits.
Right on.
So we have some time constraints, everyone, so we do have to wrap this up. Before we go, though, I would like to ask everyone one question, and everyone feel free to answer this however you will. HHS has asked what concentration of 7-OH constitutes an imminent hazard to the public safety. How would you answer that question? And if you could give one piece of advice to FDA, DEA, HHS before they make a decision on 7-OH, what would it be?
I would say raise the limit. We're not going to defeat the bill, most likely, without judicial review of considerable consequence. It may take several years. But we can effectively, by people going to regulation.gov and entering your opinion on the level per article that is legal. Presently, 1 milligram per article, we assume a tablet. That raised to 5 to 7 milligrams would be much more acceptable to most distributors and the industry as a whole, while remaining in a safe level for users. So probably the most effective thing we can do is people go to regulation.gov and move for a limit of 5 to 7 milligrams.
I'm glad that Leonard has brought up the regulation.gov comment process, because I don't know what the correct dosage level should be. I think that it really is going to vary by individual, by circumstance, by so many different things. It's certainly not 1 milligram.
Level in alcohol?
Right, that's exactly my point. What is the what is
have
the
to have
level?
a range.
It varies per person.
Yeah.
But if you look at comments, people are going in and they're sharing how much their dosage is and why that dosage is. There's stories of people who are going through cancer pain. There's stories of people who were firefighters who broke their back. There's all these different things in there. And I would say that we should be expanding this process, and HHS should be actually looking at how people are using this and realize that 1 milligram cap is simply not reflective of what people need.
Placebo. It's with placebo. Just like anything, there should be a range. I mean, and we can also think about when the range get up to, I don't know, 50 or so, you can maybe have it behind the counter. I don't know. But you can have all of these various tests or requirements once it gets above a certain level. But this notion that 5, 7, 10 is sufficient. I know I need at least 20, and I don't use that often.
Well, take 3 articles of 7. You have 20.
Yeah,
I'm just going from interviews with manufacturers who were suggesting that 7 was
This is precisely the thing. You would like to have fewer products with more concentration. You don't have to take multiple of these things, and so you can have requirements, special requirements, once you exceed a certain threshold. But I'm for making sure that we don't have to buy multiple pills for in order to get larger doses.
From a lawyer's perspective, I got a very clear answer for this would be, what exactly is the statutory authority based on that the DEA is attempting to regulate this by a percentage amount and level? I'm missing the part of the CSA that allows this sort of, level sort of criminalization to occur.
Yeah, the Controlled Substance Act is specifically states, and this is Hornbook law for 40 years, that a Schedule 1 substance, one thing is Schedule 1, that any mixture or compound, white powder, a jelly, whatever, that contains a detectable amount, and that can be micrograms and nanograms. If it contains a detectable amount, it is also illegal. So we have a real conundrum being created here. More than 1 milligram of 7 is illegal, per article is illegal. That's a Schedule 1 drug. That should make every other thing with any detectable amount of 7 also illegal. So the proposed regulation conflicts with a long-established Controlled Substances Act. They're carving out an exception for the leaf in 7. And note there's no exception for a similar pure cocaine versus coca leaf. Coca leaf is illegal. So my anticipation was that if they scheduled 7-hydroxy, the leaf would also automatically be scheduled under the Controlled Substances Act. But they're doing something different, something we've never seen before. It's quite an exercise in drug policy. And for analytical labs forever, we'll be determining, is it 1 milligram or is it 1.1 milligrams? One, you go home, the other, you're in cuffs.
I'd reiterate that it has to be a range because different people have different sizes, different purposes, and we honestly don't have that data yet. The thing about what's happening right now with HHS, receiving these comments from thousands of people who use several, this will be some of the first data we get on the rate, on the reference or the range that people are using 7-OH specifically. We have some data on how many grams people use of kratom, but not 7-OH specifically. So I would say don't set a threshold yet because we don't know. Some people had higher thresholds, for example, with severe chronic pain, or like Kat said, people are going through cancer treatment or whatever it is, may benefit from a much higher range than what the average person might want to use, or the lower end of that range. And you have unintended consequences if you set a threshold too low, in that people will have to use more of a product. For example, not to besmirch the leaf kratom industry, but if people had to take more leaf kratom, they would very likely be exposed to more heavy metals just because of what comes out of the soil and the groundwater.
And GI issues.
GI issues. You don't necessarily want that if you want people to be doing something better for them than going towards opioids, for example.
Yeah. Well, and then just to be the final person to answer the question, you asked, at what level do we think 7-hydroxy would become a threat to public harm, or something like that? And I penchant for being literal, and the answer for that is 0. If they set the level at 0, that is when public harm comes. If they set the level at 0.005%, there's going to be public harm because it's being removed from the market, and that's when we're going to see the public harm. We're not seeing the public harm at laissez-faire, any dose, whatever you want right now. We're going to see harm when it's taken away. So 0 is the answer for that.
I think you're done.
Okay.
That was great. That was
Record that, and then we will.